What if everything you thought you knew about Ted Bundy was a lie? What if the so-called execution was just a carefully orchestrated illusion? The man who terrorized America, the charming monster who confessed to killing over 30 women, what if he never really died? Some say the nightmare ended in 1989, but whispers of his presence still haunt the shadows. Is it paranoia? Or is Ted Bundy still out there? Let's unravel the chilling truth. Ted Bundy's life was the ultimate illusion, an expertly crafted facade of charm, intellect, and ambition. Beneath the polished exterior of the aspiring lawyer and self-proclaimed people person lay a monstrous predator whose crimes would shake the foundation of society. Bundy wasn't merely a serial killer, he was a psychological enigma, a figure who weaponized trust and charisma to become one of history's most prolific murderers. Born on November 24, 1946, Theodore Robert Cowell entered the world with a secret that would shape his identity. Raised by his grandparents, Bundy grew up under a shroud of deception, believing for much of his childhood that they were his parents and that his biological mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was his sister. The truth about his parentage was kept hidden, a family secret whispered behind closed doors. When Bundy eventually uncovered this lie, it was more than a betrayal, it was the first crack in the fragile structure of his psyche. Growing up in a working-class home in Philadelphia, Bundy appeared to fit in, but cracks in the picture-perfect image emerged early. While other children engaged in play and laughter, Ted often stood on the sidelines, observing with an intensity that unnerved those around him. His quiet demeanor masked a tempest of emotions, feelings of inadequacy, rejection, and a growing curiosity about violence. As a boy, Bundy developed an unusual fascination with crime and control. He would scour detective magazines, obsessing over graphic depictions of women in peril. These weren't mere curiosities, but seeds of a darker fixation that would later manifest in unimaginable ways. Yet, these warning signs were dismissed as quirks of a precocious boy, overlooked by family and teachers alike. When Bundy's family relocated to Tacoma, Washington, his teenage years unfolded in a new setting. Here he adopted the surname of his mother's new husband, Johnny Bundy. Outwardly, Ted excelled, earning good grades and charming teachers with his intelligence and wit. But beneath the surface, a quiet rage simmered. He struggled with feelings of inadequacy, especially in his interactions with women. Bundy's first experience with deep rejection came during college when he fell in love with a woman who seemed to embody everything he desired: beauty, sophistication, and status. When the relationship ended, it wasn't just heartbreak Bundy felt. It was humiliation, a wound to his fragile ego. This breakup would become a turning point, the beginning of a transformation from man to monster. In his early 20s, Bundy appeared to thrive. He attended the University of Washington, majoring in psychology. Professors and peers saw a bright, determined young man with an unshakable work ethic. Bundy wasn't just academically gifted, he was politically ambitious, volunteering for high-profile campaigns and earning the trust of those in power. But this success was a carefully constructed facade, masking the darker urges he could no longer contain. The early 1970s marked the beginning of Bundy's reign of terror, although law enforcement now suspects his crimes may have started much earlier. At first, his acts of violence were sporadic, almost experimental. His victims shared hauntingly specific characteristics: young, white, attractive women with long, dark hair parted in the middle. Bundy's methods were as chilling as they were calculated. He would feign vulnerability, pretending to have a broken arm or needing help carrying something to his car to disarm his victims. Women, drawn in by his charm and apparent helplessness, would fall into his trap. Once isolated, they were subdued, abducted, and killed in a manner so methodical it left investigators baffled. But Bundy's crimes weren't confined to one area. He became a phantom predator, moving across states to avoid detection. From Washington to Utah to Colorado, Bundy left a trail of devastation, his victims disappearing without a trace. Law enforcement struggled to connect the dots, hindered by the lack of communication between jurisdictions. The media frenzy surrounding these disappearances only fueled Bundy's ego. He followed news coverage obsessively, delighting in his ability to outsmart authorities. For Bundy, the hunt wasn't just about power, it was about control, the ultimate domination over his victims and those who sought to stop him. Yet, despite his cunning, Bundy was far from invincible. Investigators began to notice patterns in the disappearances, and a sketch of the suspect, a handsome man with a cast on his arm, began to circulate. For the first time, Bundy's name entered the realm of suspicion. But even then, those who knew him found it impossible to reconcile the charming law student with the monster described in the reports. The true horror of Ted Bundy's crimes wasn't just the acts themselves, but the betrayal of trust he exploited. Bundy shattered the illusion that predators fit a specific mold. His charm and intelligence disarmed even the most cautious individuals, creating a chilling new archetype of the boy-next-door killer. By the time Bundy's reign of terror was fully realized, he had transformed into a ghost, a figure whose name struck fear into the hearts of women across the country. But his story was only beginning, and the devastation he left behind would be felt for decades to come. The air was electric with fear. It was the mid-1970s, and across multiple states, women were vanishing without a trace. Their disappearances weren't linked at first. They were college students, secretaries, daughters, and sisters. Young women with bright futures ahead of them. No one suspected that a man who looked like he belonged in a courtroom defending justice was the one luring them into a nightmare. Ted Bundy's transition from charming law student to ruthless predator wasn't a sudden shift. It was a slow descent into depravity, meticulously planned and executed with precision. What made his crimes so terrifying was not just the brutality of his acts, but the way he manipulated, deceived, and controlled his victims before the end came. In Washington and Oregon, young women began to vanish at an alarming rate. They left their dorms, libraries, or workplaces never to be seen again. Their cases became mere missing person reports, names on a growing list that law enforcement was struggling to connect. Then, in broad daylight at a crowded beach in Lake Sammamish State Park, two women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, disappeared within hours of each other. Witnesses recalled seeing a handsome man in a sling calling himself Ted, asking for help with his sailboat. It was a tactic Bundy had perfected, feigning injury or distress to lure in compassionate women. What they didn't realize was that their kindness was about to be weaponized against them. Ott and Naslund's disappearances were a turning point. Now law enforcement had something tangible, a description of a man, a name, but it wasn't enough to stop the terror that was brewing. Bundy lived in two worlds. One where he was the upstanding, intelligent law student, and another where he was a predator who lurked in the shadows. He wasn't the stereotype of a killer. He didn't fit the mold of a crazed, unhinged man. That was the horror of it. He blended in. He had a girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, who saw the charming, loving side of him. But even she had her suspicions. She had seen the crutches, the plaster cast, the very props he used to trap his victims. She noticed his strange behaviors, the way he would disappear without explanation. But how do you reconcile the man you love with the monster making headlines? Klepfer eventually went to the police reporting her concerns, but in the 1970s, before centralized databases and forensic advancements, her claims fell through the cracks. Her tip wasn't enough. And so, Ted Bundy continued, as Bundy expanded his hunting grounds to Utah, Colorado, and beyond, his methods became even bolder. Women were taken from parking lots, their last known moments eerily similar, helping a man who seemed harmless. The brutality escalated. No longer was he just killing, he was torturing. He was playing a game of power, relishing in the fear of his victims. He would return to the crime scenes, revisiting his atrocities. But what makes Bundy's case so chilling is not just the sheer number of victims, it's the fact that there were so many opportunities to stop him. Police in multiple states had sketches matching his face. Witnesses had given his name. Elizabeth Klepfer had reported him. He had been pulled over with suspicious items in his car: handcuffs, rope, a crowbar. And yet, nothing. The system failed. Had law enforcement connected the dots sooner, how many lives could have been saved? The ultimate deception, Bundy's ability to manipulate, wasn't limited to his victims. He deceived everyone. His friends, his professors, his colleagues, even the police. When he was finally arrested in Utah in 1975 in traffic stop, investigators believed they had their man. They found stolen credit cards, suspicious tools, and circumstantial evidence. He was convicted of aggravated kidnapping, a lesser charge than what he had actually done. Even behind bars, he maintained his innocence, playing the system like a grand chess game. But Bundy wasn't finished yet. He had plans. The real horror, he would escape. Not once, but twice. And when he did, the bloodbath that followed would be one of the most shocking chapters in American crime history. The world thought Ted Bundy was dead. The electric chair had done its job, and the infamous serial killer had finally been silenced. But what if I told you that wasn't true? What if the execution was a cover-up, and Bundy never actually died? For decades, theories have circulated, some whispered among true crime enthusiasts, others backed by unsettling evidence. Was Bundy truly executed on January 24, 1989? Or did he manage to escape one last time? This isn't just another conspiracy theory. It's a possibility that, once examined closely, begins to make too much sense. And if Bundy is still out there, the real nightmare has only just begun. Florida State Prison, 1989. A crowd of over 500 people gathered outside, chanting, celebrating the long overdue justice. Inside, Bundy sat strapped to the electric chair, his expression calm, almost detached. The reporters who attended described his demeanor as airily composed. At precisely 7:06 a.m., the executioner flipped the switch. A surge of 2,000 volts shot through Bundy's body. His hands clenched into fists. His body jerked violently. 3 minutes later, he was pronounced dead. Or so they say. Officially, Ted Bundy was no more. But something about the entire execution process seemed off. Consider the following. His body was never displayed to the public. Unlike other high-profile criminals, Bundy's corpse was quickly covered and transported away. No DNA confirmation. To this day, no DNA evidence has ever been released to confirm the body was Bundy's. Unusual prison behavior. Multiple guards reportedly acted strangely in the days leading up to the execution, some whispering, others avoiding questions. His final words, "Give my love to my family and friends." It was an ambiguous statement, one that sounded more like a farewell from someone about to go into hiding than a man about to die. Then there was the matter of the body itself. Several witnesses claim that the man strapped to the chair looked different. His facial features seemed swollen, altered, almost as if he had undergone some kind of procedure before being executed. Could Bundy, the master of deception, have pulled off the ultimate escape? To understand why this theory holds weight, we need to revisit Bundy's history. He wasn't just a killer, he was a chameleon, a man who lived in disguise, blending into society with terrifying ease. Before his capture, Bundy had already escaped police custody twice. Escape 1977, Bundy was left alone in a law library while preparing his own defense. He jumped from a second-story window and fled into the woods. He remained free for 6 days. Escape to 1977. Later that year, he starved himself to fit through a hole in his prison ceiling, crawled through the ductwork, and walked out the front door dressed as a guard. This time, he remained free for 47 days before being recaptured. If he had managed such daring escapes before, why wouldn't he have one final plan in place for his execution? Following Bundy's alleged execution, strange reports began to emerge. Sightings of a man who looked exactly like Bundy popped up across the country. Texas, 1992. Gas station clerk in Amarillo swore she saw Bundy late at night buying cigarettes. When she mentioned he looked familiar, the man left abruptly, leaving his change behind. Oregon, 1996. Diner waitress reported serving a man who fit Bundy's description. He had the same piercing blue eyes and even spoke in the same articulate manner. She later realized he had paid in cash only and had no identification on him. Florida, 2001. A most chilling report came from a woman who claimed she saw Bundy watching her from a parked car. The sighting occurred in Tallahassee, mere miles from where he committed his final known murders. Argentina, 2013. Journalist investigating unsolved murders in South America reported meeting a man who matched Bundy's exact description. The man, fluent in Spanish but with a clear American accent, refused to give his real name. When asked where he was from, he allegedly smirked and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." These sightings were dismissed as paranoia, but there was one detail that couldn't be ignored. In 2017, authorities in Colorado discovered a mutilated body, murdered in a way eerily similar to Bundy's early victims. The crime scene was disturbingly precise. The positioning of the body, the lack of forensic evidence, and the victim profile all mirrored Bundy's past killings. There was just one problem. Bundy had been dead for 28 years. And yet the details of this murder were never released to the public. Only the original killer would have known how to replicate them exactly. Could Bundy have continued his killing spree under a new identity? Could he have found a way to fake his execution, disappear, and start again? Investigators tried to downplay it. They called it a coincidence. But the families of the victims weren't convinced. They demanded answers. And the more they dug, the more unsettling the truth became. Officially, Ted Bundy is dead. His ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location. But the questions remain. Why were there no public autopsy photos? Why was his body covered so quickly after the execution? Why do new murders bear his signature style? Why are there so many credible sightings of him years after his supposed death? Law enforcement refuses to entertain the idea that Bundy could still be alive. They call it absurd, a fantasy. But for those who have spent years studying his mind, the idea that he might have escaped one last time is not just possible, it's terrifyingly probable. Because if Ted Bundy is still alive, one thing is certain. He's watching, and he's waiting. What if Bundy, realizing the imminent execution, orchestrated one final act of manipulation? As he had done countless times before, he used deception to deceive everyone, including the authorities who believed they were bringing an end to his reign of terror. Several factors suggest Bundy could have faked his death. 1. The lack of DNA evidence. Bundy's body was not subjected to DNA testing, unlike other high-profile criminals who underwent such procedures post-execution. The absence of such confirmation raises questions. Why didn't officials want to confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that the body in the electric chair was indeed Bundy? 2. Bundy's charisma and manipulation. Throughout his life, Bundy demonstrated a knack for gaining the trust of others, even convincing people that he was innocent despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Could he have convinced someone in the prison system to assist him in a final act of deception? 3. The witness accounts. Several witnesses who observed Bundy during his final moments remarked that something about his appearance seemed off. His face looked swollen, his posture stiff and unnatural. Could these discrepancies indicate that it wasn't truly Bundy who died that day, but a body used as a decoy? 4. The mysterious behavior of prison guards. The guards, who had dealt with Bundy for years, reportedly acted strangely leading up to the execution. Some avoided direct questions about the process, while others acted distant and uneasy. Were these subtle signs that the system itself was in on the charade? 5. The final words. Bundy's final words were cryptic. "Give my love to my family and friends." To some, this sounded less like a farewell from a man facing imminent death, and more like a message from someone about to disappear, potentially forever. To understand how Bundy could have survived the execution, we need to consider his expertise in manipulation, escape, and evasion. He was no ordinary criminal, he was a master strategist. Bundy had spent years studying law, becoming well-versed in the system that ultimately failed to stop him in life and, potentially, in death. If Bundy had orchestrated his escape, it's plausible that he had help. Given his history of manipulating those around him, he could have easily bribed or coerced someone within the prison system to assist him. In fact, Bundy had a reputation for charming those he encountered, even gaining the trust of the officers who handled his case. It's entirely possible that someone working in the prison allowed Bundy to switch places with a decoy, or even facilitated his escape in some other way. Furthermore, Bundy had a long history of careful planning. His escapes were never impulsive. They were meticulously thought out, with attention paid to every detail. His last escape, therefore, might have been the most elaborate of all, so well executed that even the public, law enforcement, and those close to him were none the wiser. If Bundy survived the execution, what would his next steps have been? It's likely that he would have immediately gone into hiding, utilizing his knowledge of the legal system and his well-developed ability to blend into society. He might have used fake identification and assumed a new identity, leaving behind his past and his monstrous Bundy's ability to reinvent himself was well documented. After all, he had already built a life of deception, constantly shifting between personas: a charming political volunteer, an aspiring lawyer, a devoted boyfriend, and a cold-blooded killer. With these skills, it wouldn't be out of the question for him to disappear once again, this time forever. Some have speculated that Bundy could have traveled abroad, possibly to South America or even Europe, where he could have started anew. His ability to stay under the radar, coupled with his extensive knowledge of criminal behavior and law enforcement procedures, would have made it difficult for authorities to track him down.
Whether or not Ted Bundy truly survived his execution is still a matter of debate. However, what is undeniable is the lasting impact he left on society. Bundy's reign of terror was so chilling because he defied every expectation of what a killer could look like. He was charming, intelligent, and seemingly harmless. A nightmare disguised as the American. Even if Bundy is truly dead, his legacy lives on in the fear he instilled in the public and the way he shattered the illusion that predators wear obvious signs of danger. His story serves as a reminder that evil can come in many forms, and the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we least expect. If Bundy survived the execution, then the true horror may not have ended with his death. That it might just have been the beginning of a new chapter in a life built on deception, violence, and manipulation. The ghost of Ted Bundy, whether alive or dead, will forever haunt the nation that once believed it had seen the last of him. And as for those who believed the nightmare was over, they may yet be proven wrong. For Bundy was never just a man. He was a symbol of something much darker, a force that could never truly be vanquished. A force that, a year before Bundy's murder, was holed up in a fortress. In the years following his execution, the specter of Ted Bundy continued to haunt the public consciousness, a shadow that refused to fade. Despite being gone from the physical world, the aftermath of his crimes and the chilling questions surrounding his potential escape left scars on the American psyche. But Bundy's legacy wasn't confined to his heinous acts. It had far-reaching implications that reshaped criminal psychology, law enforcement practices, and the way society viewed the nature of evil itself. The impact on law enforcement and forensic investigation. Before Bundy's reign of terror, law enforcement agencies across the United States had been operating in relative isolation. Cases were handled by local departments with little cooperation between jurisdictions. This fragmented approach was part of what allowed Bundy to slip through the cracks for so long. The investigation into his murders was disjointed, with police forces failing to share critical information that could have linked the disappearances. The Bundy case, however, highlighted the need for better communication and collaboration between law enforcement agencies. As the FBI began piecing together the puzzle of his crimes, they realized that Bundy's ability to evade capture was in part due to the lack of a centralized database to track serial crimes. This realization led to significant improvements in how law enforcement approached cases of serial murder. And the FBI's behavioral science unit began to develop profiles of serial killers, laying the groundwork for the investigative techniques used today to catch killers like Ted Bundy. The introduction of modern forensic tools such as DNA analysis was also a direct result of the lessons learned from Bundy's crimes. While Bundy managed to evade arrest for years, the advent of DNA testing in the 1980s would eventually bring justice to many unsolved cases. Had DNA testing been available during his killing spree, It's likely that Bundy would have been caught much sooner. His case would later serve as a cautionary tale for law enforcement, reminding them of the importance of using all available resources in the fight against serial killers.
The execution of Ted Bundy didn't mark the end of his influence. In the years following his death, his story became the subject of intense media scrutiny and public fascination. Books, documentaries, films, and podcasts delved into the psyche of the killer, attempting to explain how a man so seemingly charming and intelligent could commit such monstrous acts. This fascination was not limited to the general public. Bundy's story also captivated criminologists, psychologists, and researchers who sought to understand what made him tick. One of the most enduring aspects of Bundy's legacy is the media's role in shaping the public's perception of him. Bundy was one of the first criminals to achieve celebrity status while he was still alive. His case was covered relentlessly, with his trial being broadcast live on television. The media's portrayal of Bundy as a well-dressed, articulate, and seemingly rational man contrasted sharply with the horrific nature of his crimes. This dichotomy fueled public intrigue as people struggled to reconcile the image of Bundy as a suave, educated man with the reality of his brutal actions. However, this media attention had a darker side. The constant coverage of Bundy's trial and his eventual execution led to a phenomenon known as criminal celebrity. Bundy's notoriety made him a figure of fascination and, for some, even admiration. The rise of true crime as a genre in popular culture can be traced back in part to the public's insatiable appetite for stories like Bundy's. This fascination with the mind of a killer, while educational in some ways, also had the unintended consequence of romanticizing violence and tragedy. For some, Bundy's charm and intelligence only served to make his crime seem more mysterious, as if he were more than just a cold-blooded killer. While Ted Bundy's name remains forever associated with his horrific crimes, it's important to remember that his victims are not merely footnotes in his story. Their lives were tragically cut short, their futures stolen by a man who exploited their trust and kindness. The legacy of Ted Bundy is ultimately a story of loss and suffering, a reminder of the women who were brutally murdered and the families who were left to pick up the pieces. The victims of Bundy were not just statistics, they were daughters, sisters, and friends. Each one had a story, a life that was abruptly and violently extinguished. Bundy's spree was not just a series of isolated crimes, it was an assault on the fabric of society itself. The women he murdered were symbolically taken from every corner of. They were the epitome of youth and promise, and their deaths represented a loss for all of humanity. For the families of Bundy's victims, the pain of their loss never truly faded. Many struggled with the guilt of having been unable to protect their loved ones, and the families of the unidentified victims faced an additional layer of trauma: the unknown. It took decades for some families to learn the fate of their loved ones, and even then, the answers brought little solace. The brutal nature of Bundy's crimes left scars that would never heal, and for the families who survived them, justice came too little, too late. Bundy's legacy continues to shape our understanding of criminal behavior. He was a master manipulator, able to deceive everyone around him, including those closest to him. His ability to blend in and appear harmless was one of the reasons his crimes went undetected for so long. Psychologists and criminologists continue to study Bundy's behavior, trying to understand what made him tick and what, if anything, could have stopped him. His case has become a textbook example of how the mind of a serial killer operates, and how law enforcement can learn from the mistakes made during his investigation. Even after decades of Ted Bundy's death, the question remains, did he truly die in 1989? Could the man who was executed have been someone else? Could Bundy have escaped one last time, using his trademark charm and guile to elude justice? As more theories emerge and new evidence is uncovered, the mystery of Bundy's final moments continues to fuel speculation. Perhaps the truth will never be fully known. What is certain is that Ted Bundy's legacy, whether he died on that fateful day or escaped to live another life, is a permanent part of American history. His crimes, his escape, and the questions surrounding his death have shaped the way we view criminal behavior, law enforcement, and the role of media in shaping public opinion. Ted Bundy's story will continue to be studied, analyzed, and debated for generations to come, and his chilling legacy will never be forgotten.